Hey guys, my name is Rick and welcome to Small Project Central. On my last video I built this miter station behind me for my small one-car garage workshop, and the first addition that I wanted to make was this charging station for my cordless drills. So I'm going to show you how I built this. Let's go! My first step in this build was to get the inside dimensions of the cabinet. I'm trying to start using the metric measurements more so I can be more measurement ambidextrous, if you will. Plus, I'm not a big fan of fractions.
721, 280.
So next I started to measure and cut my pieces.
Dime.
Bye bye.
Bye.
¿Puedo salir por aquí? ¿Por aquí?
Sí, está bien.
Ok, tú cierra, ¿ok?
Okay, bye.
Bye.
So I cleaned up the factory edges and cut each piece to size. Next, I use my calipers to determine the width of each opening for the drills. I determined 1 5/8 inch would be the ideal opening to accommodate all the drills. Next, I began measuring and marking the openings to evenly distribute them across the width of the board. This is where the metric measurements really shine. I could easily divide the total dimension by 6 openings. I ask you this question: would you rather divide 721 by 6 or divide 28 3/8 by 6? I think you know the answer.
Okay, so I went back and recalibrated the depth here from side to side and decided on 1 3/4 instead of 1 5/8. So now I've found a nice 1 3/4 diameter can in the garage here. And so I'm just transferring these lines, lining it up flush to the front of the thing here, and then bringing that around. Perfect.
Okay, so after my layout, I cut all my cross pieces here that's going to be support between, and so I'm thinking it's looking pretty good. It looks nice and uniform, and I like the fact that I'm setting these back a little bit so they won't be as noticeable. So, and I've cut the top piece as well, so now it's just a matter of getting those sections cut out. I didn't have a 1 3/4 inch Forstner bit, and I didn't really want to use my hole saw bit because I was afraid it would give me a really rough cut on those inside radiuses. So I pulled out my least favorite tool, the jigsaw. I'm really not that good with the jigsaw, which you can see by some of the less than desirable cuts. I then used a spindle bit and my drill to clean up the rough cuts on the inside radiuses. And then I worked my way over to the large spindle bit on my drill press to sand the outside radiuses. The bit was too big to fit into the slots, and I really couldn't get a good finish, so I stopped, opened my Amazon app, and immediately purchased a new set of spindle bits with various sizes. I tried to use my random orbital sander, but couldn't get the desk skin far enough. So to get a smooth finish on the edges, I sanded them all by hand. This took a pretty long time to complete, but in the end, it all worked out. The new drum sander bits came in just a day too late. Next, I started the edge banding process. The straight edges were relatively easy to finish, but the top portion really proved to be a challenge. In hindsight, square edges would have been so much easier. But no, I had to do it the hard way. I had a vision for this charging station, and I wanted it to be curvy. I thought it would look good, but more importantly, be more functional with this type of layout. So I started ironing the edge banding on the curved layout. I could only use the tip of the iron. I would iron a small section and then hit it with the J-roller. I pulled the edge band to keep it tight throughout the process. Looking back, I think I could have used my wife's curling iron, but I don't think that would have went over too well. Then I cleaned up the straight edges with the Vertux trimmer, and then filed each edge smooth. Okay, so I had a couple spots that the adhesive didn't stick too well, so I shoved some white glue down in there, and I'm clamping these. And after I get these dry, I'll wait a couple hours, and then I'll come back and try to continue sanding off the edge banding. Okay, so I decided to leave it overnight, and so we're going to go ahead and pull off all of our clamps here and see everything is nice and dry, which it is. This is good stuff. All right, so now I'm ready to do some sanding. To avoid tearing out any edge banding, I first trimmed it down with a razor. I cut down as far as I could without cutting into the veneer of the plywood. Then I carefully sanded the edge band flush to the surface in preparation for laminating. Next, I cut the laminate to make sure I had overhang on all sides. Then, using a foam roller, I applied contact adhesive to both the plywood and the laminate. It's been unseasonably hot down here in South Florida this year, so the contact dried very quickly. Okay, so what I do now is I check with the back of my fingernail, make sure everything is dry, which nothing's sticking to it, which is good. Same thing here. I knew that would be plenty good. And so for my short ones here, I've got some leftovers from Cuban mops. I'm going to stick this in here. I'm going to line up my laminate. It's a little tougher with this because these pieces are so tall. Boom. All right, good deal. I'm gonna go over it with the J-roller. Make sure I've got good contact all the way around. And next I routed the laminate flush to the substrate, taking a couple of passes to help minimize filing. I filed all the way around the piece, making sure to knock down all the sharp edges. Next, I drilled some oversized holes through the laminate to eliminate potential stress cracking. Anytime you put screws through laminate, you should pre-drill so you don't get any small cracks or fissures. If you get those, it's kind of like the crack in a windshield. It will spider out over time. Then I flipped the board and countersunk each hole and then sanded the entire surface smooth. It was time to assemble the mounting rack. I used 2-inch screws to attach the 2 outside pieces first. I then flipped the piece over and used double-sided tape to position the rest of the support pieces. I then screwed all the remaining supports. I placed the rack in the cabinet and it was a nice snug fit. I then attached the rack using 1 1/4-inch pocket hole screws. They have a truss head which held the rack tight in place. Next, I bore a hole to feed my power cords through. I started on one side and finished the cut on the other to minimize chip out. Next, I started to build the base, which would hold the chargers. I cut some angled pieces which would support the top. I didn't have a piece of plywood large enough to span the inside dimension of the cabinet, and I didn't really want to cut into an entire new sheet, so I pieced together some MDF I had left over using biscuits. I cut and attached a small strip to the front of the base. I then used a scrap piece of plywood to position the angle supports, marked and cut off the overhang. It was so hot in the garage, I was able to use my Type Bond glue to hold the supports in place until I flipped the top and nailed it. I then sanded the top smooth and applied laminate to the front edge. I then routed off the overhanging laminate and filed in preparation for the laminate top piece. I was anxious to finish this project, so I took a chance and applied the laminate without using dowels. So I stuck the laminate, J-rolled, routed, and filed all the edges smooth. I then cleaned up any glue that got onto the surface with some acetone. I was down to my final step on this build. I used some painter's tape to locate the mounting holes for each of the chargers. Then I transferred the marks to the laminate top, pre-drilled the holes, and then inserted some screws that would fit into the keyhole slots on the back of the chargers. I then mounted the chargers and fed the power cords to the back. And of course, I made a last-minute change and decided to bore a hole under the chargers to hide the cords.
That's what I think I'll do. Wait.
So I bored the holes, remounted the chargers, and made the final installation on the charger base. This project was complete. I hope you liked this build as much as I did. Be sure to join me on my next video when I install a guide rail and stop block for my miter station. Until next time.